The harsh winds of the Wyoming Territory carried death's promise as Luke Sawyer stared into a fresh grave, vowing with every fiber of his being that he would never give his heart to another living soul as long as he drew breath. The year was 1878, and with the dirt still fresh on his wife's grave, he'd become as hard and unyielding as the mountain ranges that surrounded the small town of Copper Ridge. Luke pulled his worn leather hat lower over his eyes, shielding them from both the setting sun and the pitying glances of the townsfolk who had gathered for the burial. Sarah had been taken by consumption, wasting away before his eyes over the course of 6 agonizing months. He'd watched helplessly as the vibrant woman who had laughed with her whole body and loved with her whole heart had been reduced to hollow cheeks and rattling breaths. "Mr. Sawyer." Reverend Thompson approached cautiously, his Bible clutched to his chest. "Would you like to come by the parsonage for some supper? Mrs. Thompson has made a stew." "No." Luke's voice was rough from disuse. "I appreciate the offer, Reverend, but I need to get back to the ranch." The older man nodded, placing a weathered hand briefly on Luke's shoulder. "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. In time, you'll find peace." Luke didn't respond. He didn't believe in peace anymore, not for him. At 32 years old, he'd lost everything that mattered. The ranch was just land and cattle now, not the home he and Sarah had planned to fill with children and laughter. He mounted his chestnut stallion, Rusty, and rode away from the cemetery without looking back. The 5-mile ride to his ranch gave him time to shore up the walls around what remained of his heart. By the time the modest 2-story house came into view, Luke had buried his emotions as effectively as they'd buried his wife. The ranch hands kept their distance as he dismounted and handed Rusty's reins to young Tommy, the stable boy. They'd all been fond of Sarah, who had treated each of them with kindness and respect. Now, they moved around their boss like he was made of glass that might shatter at any moment. "Got the north pasture fence fixed, boss," his foreman, Frank Miller, reported as Luke strode toward the house. "And we moved the cattle to the east range like you wanted." Luke nodded curtly. "Good, we'll start the drive to Cheyenne next week." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "So soon?" "We usually don't head out until. We're going early." Luke cut him off. "I need to secure better contracts this year." What he didn't say was that he couldn't bear the thought of staying in the house that still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender soap. Every corner held a memory, every room an echo of her voice. That night, Luke sat alone at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey his only companion. He didn't cry. He hadn't shed a tear since the doctor had told him there was nothing more to be done. Instead, he made himself a promise as the amber liquid burned down his throat. He would never love again. Love was weakness. Love was pain. And Luke Sawyer was done with both. For 3 years, Luke kept that promise. The ranch prospered under his relentless work ethic. He expanded his herd, bought more land, and earned a reputation as a fair but hard businessman. The townsfolk of Copper Ridge called him Stone-Faced Sawyer behind his back, a moniker he knew about but didn't care to challenge. Let them talk. He had his cattle, his land, and his solitude. He rarely went to town except for supplies or business, avoiding the social gatherings that had once been a regular part of his life with Sarah. The few times someone tried to introduce him to a lovely young widow or a sweet schoolteacher new to town, Luke shut down the matchmaking attempts with a glare cold enough to freeze hell itself. The spring of 1881 brought unusual rainfall to the territory, turning the normally dusty trails to mud and swelling the creeks beyond their banks. Luke and his men had spent the better part of 2 weeks rescuing stranded cattle and repairing weather damage to the ranch. It was during one such rescue mission that Luke's life changed forever. He had ridden out alone to check on a remote section of his property where a small family of homesteaders had recently settled. He'd reluctantly allowed them to build on a corner of his land. The father had seemed decent enough, offering fair payment and promising to help maintain the boundaries. As Luke approached the crude cabin, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The door hung askew on its hinges, and there was no smoke coming from the chimney despite the chilly spring air. He dismounted cautiously, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Hello? Anyone here?" he called, approaching the cabin slowly. A weak sound from inside made him quicken his pace. Drawing his gun, Luke pushed the damaged door open with his boot and stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was in disarray, furniture overturned, provisions scattered across the dirt floor. And there, huddled in the corner, was a woman. Her dress was torn, her face bruised, and her eyes wide with terror when they landed on him. "Don't," she gasped, trying to push herself further into the corner. "Please, no more." Luke holstered his gun immediately and held up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you, madam. I'm Luke Sawyer. This is my land." She stared at him, wild-eyed, a strand of dark blonde hair falling across her face. Luke could see she was trembling uncontrollably. "The Zimmers," he said, looking around the cabin. "Are they your family?" The woman's face crumpled. "Gone," she whispered. "They're all gone." Luke took a cautious step forward, noting her wince. "What's your name?" She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. Willow Zimmerman. I married Thomas Zimmerman 3 months ago in Kansas City." "What happened here, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Tears spilled down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Raiders. They came yesterday. Thomas and his parents tried to fight, but—" She closed her eyes, unable to continue. Luke understood all too well what had likely transpired. The territory was safer than it had been a decade ago, but lawless men still roamed, preying on isolated homesteaders. "Are you injured?" he asked, keeping his voice even and calm despite the anger building inside him. Willow's eyes opened, revealing a world of pain that went beyond physical wounds. They didn't just take our supplies." Luke's jaw tightened. He'd seen the aftermath of such attacks before. "I'm going to take you back to my ranch," he said firmly. "You need medical attention." She shook her head frantically. No, I can't, Mrs. Zimmerman," Luke interrupted. "You can't stay here. Those men might come back, and if your injuries aren't treated, they could get worse." He approached her slowly, like he would a skittish colt. When he was close enough, he knelt down, still keeping a respectful distance. "I give you my word that no harm will come to you at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Carson, will tend to you. Once you're recovered, I'll help you get to wherever you want to go." Willow studied his face, searching for deceit. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she gave a small nod. I can't walk very well," she admitted. Without a word, Luke removed his coat and wrapped it gently around her shoulders before lifting her as carefully as possible. She was so light in his arms, fragile as a bird with broken wings. The contact made something shift uncomfortably in his chest, an emotion he quickly tamped down. This wasn't about him. It was about basic human decency, nothing more. The ride back to the ranch was slow and difficult. Luke positioned Willow in front of him on the saddle, supporting her with one arm while he guided Rusty with the other. She remained silent throughout the journey, occasionally letting out a small sound of pain when the horse's movement jostled her injuries. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Frank spotted them first, rushing forward when he saw Luke carrying a woman toward the house. "Boss, what happened?" "Raiders hit the Zimmerman place," Luke replied grimly. "This is Mrs. Zimmerman. The rest of the family is dead. Send 2 men to bury them properly and have someone ride to town for the doctor." Frank's face darkened with anger and sympathy. "Yes, sir." Right away. Inside the house, Mrs. Carson, the matronly housekeeper Luke had hired after Sarah's death, took charge immediately. She ushered Luke upstairs to the guest bedroom, quickly turning down the covers so he could lay Willow on the bed. "You poor dear," Mrs. Carson murmured, her experienced eyes taking in Willow's condition. "Mr. Sawyer, you should wait outside. I'll see to her until the doctor arrives." Luke nodded, stepping back. Before he left, he caught Willow's gaze. "You're safe here," he told her, hoping she believed him. The doctor arrived an hour later. Luke waited in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand as Dr. Morrison examined Willow upstairs. When the doctor finally came down, his expression was grave. "She's been through hell, Luke," he said without preamble. "Multiple contusions, 2 cracked ribs, and, well, the other injuries you can imagine. Physically, she'll heal with time and rest. Mentally." He shook his head. "That's another matter." Luke nodded grimly. "What can I do? Keep her comfortable. Make sure she eats and drinks. I've given her laudanum for the pain so she'll sleep through the night. I'll come back tomorrow to check on her." After the doctor left, Luke sat alone in his study, troubled thoughts keeping him company. He had planned to offer Willow transportation to the nearest town with a decent hotel once she was well enough to travel. From there, she could contact any family she might have or find work as a seamstress or shop girl. But as the days passed, that plan became increasingly uncertain. Willow's physical recovery was slower than expected, and Luke found himself reluctant to rush her departure. He told himself it was simple Christian charity, the woman had nowhere else to go after all. Yet deep down, Luke recognized an uncomfortable truth. Something about Willow Zimmerman had breached the fortress around his heart. It wasn't romantic interest, he had buried such feelings with Sarah. But her quiet strength in the face of unspeakable trauma stirred his admiration, and her vulnerability awakened a protective instinct he had thought long dead. A week after her arrival, Luke found Willow sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl Mrs. Carson had provided. Her bruises had begun to fade, turning from angry purple to sickly yellow-green. She still moved gingerly, mindful of her healing ribs, but there was more color in her cheeks now. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Luke greeted her, his hat in his hands. "It's good to see you up and about." She offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer, for everything. I know I've been an imposition, you haven't," he interrupted firmly. "And you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Willow looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking about what comes next. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but—" She trailed off. "But," Luke prompted when she didn't continue. "The idea of such a long journey alone." She shook her head. "I don't think I can face that yet." Luke understood her fear. A single woman traveling alone was vulnerable under the best circumstances. For someone who had so recently survived violence, the prospect must be terrifying. "There's no rush," he said. "The guest room is yours for as long as you want it." Her eyes, a clear blue that reminded him of summer skies, met his. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question caught Luke off guard. "It's what anyone would do," he replied automatically. "No," Willow said softly. "It isn't. Not everyone would take in a stranger and give her shelter with no questions asked, no expectations." Luke shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't accustomed to discussing his motivations, least of all with someone who seemed to see past his carefully constructed facade. "My wife," he found himself saying, the words emerging before he could stop them. "She would have wanted me to help you." Willow's expression softened. "Your wife, she died 3 years ago, consumption." "I'm sorry," she whispered, and Luke could tell she meant it. There was no hollow sympathy in her voice, just a genuine recognition of shared pain. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the ranch hands working in the corrals. Finally, Luke cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carson tells me you know how to sew." Willow nodded. "Yes, I worked as a seamstress before I married Thomas. We could use help with that around here," Luke said. "The men are always tearing their shirts, and I have curtains that haven't been mended since." He stopped, unwilling to mention Sarah again. "I'd be happy to help," Willow replied. "It would be a small way to repay your kindness." Luke nodded, relieved to have found a solution that would allow her to stay without feeling like charity. "Then it's settled. You'll recover your strength, help around the house, and when you're ready to decide about St. Louis, we'll discuss it then." What Luke didn't anticipate was how Willow's presence would gradually transform the somber atmosphere of the ranch. It began subtly, the scent of fresh, baked bread wafting through the kitchen again, wildflowers arranged in a vase on the dining table, the sound of soft humming as she worked on mending. The ranch hands noticed the change too. They began to tip their hats respectfully when they passed her, and Luke overheard Tommy telling one of the newer hands, "Mrs. Zimmerman's been through a terrible ordeal, but she's as brave as they come." Luke watched it all with a mixture of appreciation and unease. Willow wasn't trying to take Sarah's place. She was too respectful of the past for that. But her presence was undeniably breathing life back into spaces that had been cold and functional for too long. One evening, about a month after Willow's arrival, Luke returned from a long day of work to find her in his study, a book open in her lap. She jumped up when she saw him, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sawyer. I shouldn't have come in here without permission." "It's all right," he said, surprising himself with his lack of irritation. The study had been his sanctuary, the one place where he could retreat from the memories that haunted the rest of the house. Yet seeing Willow there didn't feel like an intrusion. She held up the book. Wordsworth. I didn't expect a cattle rancher to have poetry on his shelves. "It was Sarah's," Luke admitted. "My wife loved poetry. She used to read it aloud in the evenings." Willow carefully replaced the book on the shelf. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was." Luke hesitated, then added, "You would have liked her. She had a way of making everyone feel welcome." "I wish I could have known her," Willow said sincerely. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Sawyer, I've been meaning to ask, would it be all right if I worked in the garden? It's become rather overgrown, and I've always found gardening soothing." The garden had been Sarah's pride and joy. After her death, Luke had ordered the ranch hands to maintain the bare minimum to keep it from becoming completely wild, but he had avoided the space entirely. "The garden," he repeated, his voice sounding strangely hollow to his own ears. Willow must have sensed his hesitation. "I'm sorry, it was presumptuous of me to ask." "No," Luke said quickly. "No, it's fine. The garden should be tended properly. Sarah would have hated to see it neglected." The smile that blossomed on Willow's face made something twist in Luke's chest. "Thank you. I promise to take good care of it." After she left, Luke poured himself a drink and stood by the window, watching the sun sink below the mountains. The familiar pain of missing Sarah was there, but alongside it was something new, a tentative warmth that felt dangerously like hope. The following weeks brought a gradual but unmistakable shift in Luke's relationship with Willow. As spring turned to summer, she spent hours in the garden, coaxing life back into the neglected beds. Luke found himself lingering to watch her work, admiring her determination as she tackled overgrown rose bushes and cleared pathways that had been lost to weeds. Sometimes they would talk cautious conversations at first about the weather or ranch business, but gradually their discussions deepened. Luke found himself telling Willow about his childhood in Missouri, his journey west as a young man, and how he'd built the ranch from almost nothing. In turn, She shared stories of her life in Kansas City, her dreams of someday having a home of her own, and even in halting words, some of the trauma she had endured at the hands of the raiders. "I keep thinking I could have done something," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "If I'd been faster or braver." "No," Luke said firmly. "What happened wasn't your fault. Those men were animals. You survived, Willow." That took courage. She looked at him, startled. It was the first time he had used her given name. Luke himself was surprised by the intimacy of it, but he didn't take it back. Somehow, in the weeks she had been at the ranch, Mrs. Zimmerman no longer seemed to fit the woman he had come to know, the woman who sang quietly as she hung laundry on the line, who had befriended the ranch's mouser cats, and who sometimes still woke screaming from nightmares that brought him running to her door. "Thank you, Luke," she replied softly, and the sound of his name on her lips sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. That night, lying awake in his bed, Luke faced an uncomfortable truth. He was beginning to care for Willow as more than just a woman in need of protection. The realization filled him with both longing and dread. He had sworn never to love again, never to make himself vulnerable to the soul-crushing loss he had experienced with Sarah's death. But Willow had slipped past his defenses without even trying. Her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of tragedy, and the gentle way she had begun to heal not just herself, but the entire ranch had awakened feelings Luke had believed long dead. The next morning, Luke deliberately rose before dawn and rode out to the far pastures, avoiding the house and Willow entirely. He needed space to think, to remind himself of the vow he had made at Sarah's graveside. He didn't return until after sunset, exhausted and dust-covered. The house was quiet when he entered, most of the lamps already extinguished. Luke made his way to the kitchen for a late supper, only to find Willow sitting at the table, a plate of food waiting for him. "I thought you might be hungry," she said simply. "You didn't have to wait up," he replied, uncomfortable with her thoughtfulness. "I wanted to." She pushed the plate toward him. "Eat while it's still warm." Luke sat down and began to eat, acutely aware of Willow watching him. The stew was delicious, better than anything that had come from his kitchen in years. "This is good," he said between bites. "Thank you. Mrs. Carson taught me her recipe." Willow smiled, then her expression grew serious. "Luke, have I done something to upset you?" He nearly choked on a piece of potato. "What? No, why would you think that? You've been avoiding me," she said directly. "If you want me to leave, I don't," he interrupted, then immediately felt foolish at the force behind his words. More calmly, he added, "I don't want you to leave. I've just been busy." Willow didn't look convinced. "I understand if my presence here has become uncomfortable for you. I know I've stayed longer than we initially discussed." Luke set down his fork with a sigh. "It's not that, Willow, it's—" He struggled to find the right words. "You've brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever, and that scares me." Her eyes widened slightly. "Scares you? When Sarah died, I swore I would never let myself care for anyone again." Luke's voice was low, almost a confession. "It hurt too damn much to lose her. I couldn't bear to go through that kind of pain again." "And now?" Willow asked softly. Luke met her gaze across the table. "Now I find myself caring anyway about you." The words hung in the air between them, too honest to take back. Willow's cheeks flushed and she looked down at her hands. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I should, considering what happened to you," Luke finished for her. "I know, it's too soon for both of us." Willow nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "What do we do now?" It was the most practical question she could have asked, and somehow that made Luke smile. This was one of the things he admired about her ability to face difficult situations head-on. "We give ourselves time," he said. No expectations, no pressure, just time. Finally, she looked up at him, a tentative smile curving her lips. I think I can manage that. The following days brought a new awareness between them, a careful dance of growing feelings and mutual respect. Luke no longer avoided Willow, but he was careful not to rush her or himself. They continued their evening conversations on the porch, shared meals with more ease than before, and occasionally rode together to check on different parts of the ranch. Summer progressed, bringing with it the annual town festival in Copper Ridge. Luke had avoided the event since Sarah's death, but this year he found himself suggesting to Willow that they attend. You don't have to go if you're not ready for crowds, he added, aware that she still sometimes flinched when strangers came too close. But the food is good, and there's usually decent music. Willow considered for a moment. I think I'd like to try, she said finally. I can't hide away forever. The day of the festival dawned bright and clear. Luke found himself unusually nervous as he waited for Willow to come downstairs. When she appeared, his breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair pinned up in a style that accentuated the graceful line of her neck. The bruises had long since faded, and though she was still thinner than she should be, there was a healthy glow to her skin now. You look beautiful, Luke said before he could stop himself. Willow blushed, smoothing her hands over the skirt of her dress. Mrs. Carson helped me alter one of Sarah's old dresses. I hope that's all right. It's more than all right, Luke assured her. Sarah would have wanted her clothes to be worn rather than gathering dust. The ride to town was pleasant, the summer air fragrant with wildflowers and pine. As they approached Copper Ridge, Luke could see the main street had been transformed with colorful bunting and tables laden with food and crafts for sale. It's lovely, Willow remarked, taking in the festive scene. Reminds me of county fairs back home. Luke helped her down from the wagon, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk who had not seen him at a social event in years, and had certainly never seen the woman at his side. Rumors had circulated, of course, about the survivor he had taken in, but few had met Willow in person. Luke Sawyer, as I live and breathe, Mayor Jenkins approached with a wide smile. We didn't expect to see you today. Mayor, Luke nodded politely. May I introduce Mrs. Willow Zimmerman? Willow, this is Mayor Jenkins and his wife, Margaret. Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly at Willow. We've heard about your ordeal, my dear. I'm so glad to see you recovering. Thank you, Willow replied. Mr. Sawyer has been very kind. Has he now? Mrs. Jenkins gave Luke an appraising look that made him want to squirm like a schoolboy. How wonderful! Throughout the day, similar scenes played out as Luke introduced Willow to the townsfolk. Some were openly curious, others more discreet, but all seemed pleased to see the notorious stone-faced Sawyer participating in community life again, and with a lovely companion, no less. For her part, Willow handled the attention with grace, though Luke noticed she stayed close to his side, occasionally touching his arm when the crowd grew too dense. He found he didn't mind her nearness. In fact, he took comfort in it as much as she seemed to take comfort in his. They sampled pies at the baking contest, watched the children's sack races, and even joined in a group dance when the band struck up a lively tune. Luke hadn't danced since before Sarah's illness, and he was surprised to find he remembered the steps. More surprising still was the joy he felt with Willow in his arms, her laughter bright as they turned about the wooden dance floor. As the sun began to set, Luke noticed Willow looking tired. Ready to head back? He asked quietly. She nodded, some of the light gone from her eyes. Yes, please. It's been wonderful, but it's a lot after everything you've been through, Luke finished for her. I understand. They said their goodbyes, accepting invitations to visit from several of the townsfolk who seemed eager to continue the acquaintance. As they walked back to the wagon, Reverend Thompson fell into step beside them. "It's good to see you rejoining the land of the living, Luke," the older man said kindly. "Sarah would approve, I think." Luke tensed, but before he could respond, Willow spoke. "From what I've heard of her, Sarah Sawyer sounds like she had a generous heart. I wish I could have known her." Reverend Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he smiled. "Yes, she was indeed generous of spirit, much like yourself, Mrs. Zimmerman." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Luke and Willow lost in their own thoughts. The mention of Sarah had cast a shadow over what had otherwise been a perfect day. "I'm sorry if what I said to the Reverend upset you," Willow said finally as the ranch came into view. "It wasn't my place to speak of her." Luke shook his head. "You didn't upset me, it's just, hearing her name in public still catches me off guard sometimes." "Do you think the Reverend was right?" Willow asked hesitantly. "That she would approve of us spending time together?" The question hung in the air, fraught with implications neither of them had fully voiced. Luke guided the horses into the yard before answering. "Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone," he said slowly. "She told me that near the end. Made me promise to find happiness again someday." He turned to look at Willow directly. "I broke that promise for a long time. I was too angry, too afraid of feeling anything again." Willow's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "And now I'm still afraid," Luke admitted. "But for different reasons." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. Willow didn't step away. "What are you afraid of now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of what I feel for you," Luke said honestly. "Because it's growing stronger every day, and I don't know if you're ready for that, if either of us is ready." Willow raised a hand to his cheek, the touch so light he might have imagined it. "I'm not sure I'll ever be completely ready, Luke. What happened? It changes a person. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel safe, and sometimes I even feel happy." Luke covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "That's enough for now, then. We'll take it one day at a time." The weeks that followed were a time of cautious courtship. Luke found small ways to show Willow his growing affection, bringing her wildflowers from his rides, carving a beautiful wooden box for her sewing supplies, listening attentively when she spoke of her hopes for the future. In turn, Willow's trust in him deepened. She no longer startled when he entered a room unexpectedly, and she began to seek out his company rather than simply accepting it when offered. Their first kiss happened on a warm August evening, as fireflies danced around the garden Willow had restored to its former glory. They had been discussing plans for harvesting the abundant vegetables she had grown, when suddenly the conversation lapsed into a comfortable silence. Looking at her in the golden light of sunset, hair slightly disheveled from her work, cheeks flushed with health and happiness, Luke was struck by the realization that he had fallen completely in love with her. "Willow," he said softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. She turned her face into his touch, eyes closing briefly. "Yes, I think I'm ready to break my vow," he murmured, her eyes opened, questioning. "What vow?" "The one I made to never love again." Luke's voice was steady despite the thundering of his heart. "Because I love you, Willow Zimmerman. And if you need more time, I understand, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer." Willow's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I don't need more time to know how I feel, Luke Sawyer. I love you too. I think I have for months now." Luke leaned forward slowly, giving her ample time to pull away if she wished. But Willow moved to meet him, and their lips came together in a kiss that was gentle yet profound, a promise, a beginning, a healing for them both. When they finally broke apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he whispered. "Never wanted to, truth be told, but loving you. It doesn't diminish what I had with Sarah. It honors it somehow." "Because she taught you how to love," Willow said softly, "and in a way that gift has come back to me." They stood together in the garden as darkness fell, holding each other close, two wounded souls finding unexpected redemption in each other's arms. The days grew shorter as summer gave way to fall, and Luke found himself thinking of the future in a way he hadn't since Sarah's death. He and Willow had settled into a rhythm of shared work and growing intimacy. Their evenings often spent planning improvements to the ranch or simply enjoying each other's company. One crisp October morning, Luke rode to town with a specific purpose in mind. The small jewelry store on Copper Ridge's Main Street wasn't much to look at from the outside, but Abraham Cohen's craftsmanship was renowned throughout the territory. "Mr. Sawyer," the jeweler greeted him with surprise. "How can I help you today?" Luke removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. "I'm looking for a ring, Mr. Cohen, an engagement ring." Abraham's face split into a wide smile. "For the lovely Mrs. Zimmerman, I presume? Word travels fast in a small town, Mr. Sawyer." "Yes," Luke admitted, a hint of a smile tugging at his own lips. "For Willow." The jeweler led him to a glass case containing several rings. "Did you have something particular in mind?" Luke considered the selection. None seemed quite right until his eye caught a glint of blue among the more traditional diamonds. "That one," he said, pointing to a delicate gold band set with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "The blue matches her eyes." Abraham nodded approvingly. "An excellent choice. Sapphires symbolize wisdom and purity of heart, quite fitting, I would say." As the jeweler wrapped the ring in a velvet pouch, he asked, "When do you plan to propose, Mr. Sawyer?" "Soon," Luke replied. "I thought perhaps at the harvest festival next week." Abraham chuckled. "Ah, a public declaration. The town will be abuzz for months." Luke hadn't considered the public nature of such a proposal. He had simply thought Willow would enjoy the festival, and it seemed a happy occasion for beginning their future together. But now he wondered if a more private moment might be better, more personal for them both. Riding back to the ranch, the ring safely tucked in his pocket, Luke mulled over his options. By the time he arrived home, he had made his decision. Willow was in the kitchen with Mrs. Carson, the two women laughing as they preserved the last of the season's peaches. The sight of her flower dusting her cheek, hair pulled back in a simple braid, eyes bright with happiness, cemented Luke's certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. "You're back early," Willow remarked, wiping her hands on her apron as she came to greet him. "Everything all right in town?" "Everything's fine," Luke assured her. "I was thinking we might ride out to the North Ridge this afternoon. The aspens are at their peak, all gold and red. It's quite a sight." Willow's eyes lit up. The North Ridge overlooked a valley that was particularly beautiful in autumn, but it was a good hour's ride from the ranch. "I'd love that. Let me change into my riding clothes." Mrs. Carson gave Luke a knowing look as Willow hurried upstairs. "I'll pack you a nice basket for your outing," she said, her tone making it clear she suspected his intentions. Luke smiled sheepishly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you as long as I have," the housekeeper replied, patting his arm affectionately. "It's time, Luke." "Past time, if you ask me." The ride to the North Ridge was pleasant, the crisp autumn air invigorating after the heat of summer. Willow rode beside Luke on the gentle mare he had purchased for her, chatting about her plans for next year's garden and the approaching winter. "I was thinking we might host a Christmas gathering at the ranch," she was saying. "Nothing elaborate, just the hands and maybe a few people from town who don't have family nearby." Luke smiled at her thoughtfulness. I think that's a fine idea." They reached the ridge just as the afternoon sun cast its golden light across the valley below. The aspen trees had indeed turned magnificent shades of gold and crimson, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Luke spread a blanket on a flat rock overlooking the view, and they enjoyed the simple meal Mrs. Carson had packed: cold chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts, and a thermos of hot coffee. "It's so beautiful here," Willow sighed contentedly, leaning against Luke's shoulder as they gazed out at the panorama. "I never imagined I'd find such peace after what happened." Luke wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer. "You're the strongest person I know, Willow. You didn't just survive, you rebuilt your life. You helped me rebuild mine." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "We helped each other, Luke. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't found me that day." "I think you would have found your way," Luke said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I'm grateful beyond words that our paths crossed, even if the circumstances were terrible." Willow smiled. "So am I." Luke took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "There's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" she prompted when he hesitated. "When I lost Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over forever. I closed myself off from feeling anything, from connecting with anyone." Luke took her hand in his. "But you changed that, Willow. You made me remember what it means to care, to hope, to love." Tears welled in Willow's eyes as Luke reached into his pocket and withdrew the velvet pouch. "I can't promise that life will always be easy," he continued, his voice growing husky with emotion. "But I can promise that you'll never face its challenges alone again, not as long as I draw breath." He opened the pouch, revealing the sapphire ring. "Willow Zimmerman, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Willow couldn't speak, overcome with emotion. Then, with tears streaming down her cheeks, she nodded emphatically. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes, Luke Sawyer, I will marry you." Luke's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the light like a captured piece of sky. "It matches your eyes," he said softly. Willow looked at the ring, then back at Luke. "It's beautiful," she whispered before leaning forward to kiss him, pouring all her love and hope for their future into the embrace. They stayed on the ridge until sunset, making plans for their wedding and the life they would build together. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, like diamonds scattered across blue velvet. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Copper Ridge and the surrounding area. Most reactions were positive. The townsfolk had witnessed Luke's transformation from the bitter, isolated widower to the more open man he had become with Willow at his side, and they approved of the match. There were a few raised eyebrows, of course. Some thought it too soon after Willow's traumatic experience. Others whispered that Luke was being disloyal to Sarah's memory. But the couple weathered these criticisms with the same quiet strength they had shown through their individual trials. They decided on a December wedding, a small ceremony at the ranch with only close friends in attendance. As the date approached, Willow threw herself into preparations, determined to make their home festive not only for the wedding but for the Christmas gathering she had suggested. Luke watched her with growing amazement. This woman who had been so broken when he found her was now confidently directing ranch hands and hanging evergreen boughs and stringing lanterns for the ceremony. 2 days before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Luke was in the barn when Tommy came running in, out of breath. "Boss, there's a fancy lady asking for Mrs. Zimmerman. Says she's her aunt from St. Louis." Luke frowned. Willow had written to her aunt months ago but had received no reply. She had eventually concluded that the letter had been lost, or that her aunt had moved from her last known address. He found Willow in the parlor with an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s. They were holding hands, both with tears in their eyes. "Luke," Willow exclaimed when she saw him. "This is my Aunt Alina. She only just received my letter. It was forwarded several times, as she's moved to Chicago since I last saw her." Luke stepped forward, extending his hand. Mrs. Alina Wilson," the woman supplied, taking his hand briefly. "I came as soon as I read what had happened to my niece. I had no idea she had suffered so terribly." She turned back to Willow. "My dear, you must return to Chicago with me. I have a lovely home with plenty of room and the best doctors if you still need medical attention." Luke's heart dropped to his boots. Would Willow want to leave now that she had family offering her a comfortable life in a big city? A life far from the memories of her trauma, with opportunities a cattle ranch in Wyoming couldn't provide. Willow glanced at Luke, reading the concern in his eyes. She smiled reassuringly before turning back to her aunt. "That's very kind, Aunt Alina, but my place is here now." She held up her left hand, the sapphire ring glinting in the firelight. "Luke and I are to be married in 2 days." Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows shot up. "Married? But Willow, after what you've been through, surely you're not thinking clearly. You need time to heal before making such a decision." "I've had time," Willow said firmly. "Luke has been nothing but patient and respectful. He saved my life, Aunt Alina, and not just by bringing me to safety that day. He helped me find a reason to live again, to trust again." The older woman looked skeptical. "And you, Mr. Sawyer, what are your intentions toward my niece?" Luke met her gaze steadily. "To love her, protect her, and do everything in my power to make her happy for the rest of our lives." Mrs. Wilson studied him for a long moment. "Well," she said finally, "I can see you're both quite determined. And I must admit, Willow looks healthier and happier than I expected after reading her letter." "You'll stay for the wedding, won't you, Aunt Alina?" Willow asked hopefully. "And perhaps a while afterward. I'd like for you to get to know Luke and see the life we're building here." The older woman's expression softened. "Of course I'll stay for the wedding. As for afterward, we shall see." True to her word, Mrs. Wilson remained for the ceremony, which took place in the ranch house parlor on a cold, clear December day. Reverend Thompson officiated, his words about love's healing power bringing tears to more than a few eyes among the gathered friends. Willow was radiant in a simple ivory gown that Mrs. Carson and the women from town had helped her make. When she and Luke exchanged vows, their voices were steady and sure, their eyes never leaving each other's faces. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared with evident satisfaction. "Luke, you may kiss your bride." Luke lifted Willow's face to his with gentle hands, sealing their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and commitment. The celebration afterward was joyful yet intimate, exactly what they had wanted. Mrs. Wilson, observing the genuine affection between the newlyweds and the respect shown to them by the ranch hands and townsfolk, gradually relaxed her initial reservations. "I can see you've found your place here, Willow," she told her niece as the evening drew to a close. "I won't pretend I'm not disappointed you won't be returning to Chicago with me, but I respect your choice." Willow hugged her aunt tightly. "Thank you for understanding, and for coming all this way. Promise you'll write regularly," Mrs. Wilson insisted. "And perhaps you and Luke might visit Chicago someday." "We'd like that," Luke said, joining the conversation. "Maybe next autumn after the cattle drive." After the guests had departed and Mrs. Wilson had retired to the guest room, Luke and Willow stood alone in the parlor, the room still festooned with evergreens and glowing with lamplight. "Mrs. Sawyer," Luke murmured, drawing his new wife into his arms. "How does that sound?" Willow smiled up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. like the most wonderful name in the world. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, their love transcended the physical act, becoming a healing balm for wounds both seen and unseen. For Luke, it was the final breaking of the walls he had built around his heart. For Willow, it was the ultimate reclaiming of her body and spirit from the violence that had been done to her. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they spoke softly of their hopes for the future the family they might create together, the ranch they would continue to build, the life they would share. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Luke confessed, stroking Willow's hair as she rested her head on his chest. "After Sarah died, I was convinced that part of my life was over forever. And I believed I would never feel safe or whole again," Willow replied. "We were both wrong, weren't we? Gloriously wrong," Luke agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I've never been so grateful for being mistaken." The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but Luke and Willow faced them together with the strength they had forged through individual suffering and shared healing. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Luke's business acumen, combined with Willow's practical creativity, made for a successful partnership that extended beyond their personal relationship. They expanded the cattle operation, added sheep to diversify their income, and even planted an apple orchard that eventually produced the best cider in the territory. 14 months after their wedding, Willow gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after her first husband. Luke had been the one to suggest the name, a gesture of respect for the man who had been part of Willow's journey. He would be honored, Willow had said, tears in her eyes as she cradled their newborn son. And it's a good, strong name. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Sarah Alina, named for the two important women who had shaped Luke and Willow's lives. Mrs. Wilson traveled from Chicago for the christening, bringing extravagant gifts and staying for a month to dote on both grandchildren. As the children grew, so did the legend of their parents' love story. The tale of the harsh cowboy who had sworn off love until he found a broken woman and his heart broke open for her became something of a local romance, embellished with each telling until it took on almost mythic proportions. Luke and Willow would laugh about it sometimes, sitting on their porch in the evenings as they watched their children play in the yard that had once been Sarah's garden. "They make it sound like a dime novel," Luke would say, shaking his head. "All drama and no real pain." "People prefer happy endings without the messy parts," Willow would reply, leaning against his shoulder. "But I wouldn't trade our messy parts, Luke. They made us who we are." By the time Thomas was 10 and Sarah Alina 8, the Sawyer ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. Luke's reputation had transformed from stone-faced Sawyer to a respected community leader, a man people turned to for fair judgment and wise counsel. Willow, too, had found her place beyond the ranch. She organized aid for families in need, taught reading to the children of ranch hands, and eventually helped establish the first proper library in Copper Ridge. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Luke surprised Willow with a trip to Chicago to visit her aunt, who had grown too frail to travel west. They spent 3 weeks in the bustling city, showing their wide-eyed children the wonders of urban life while reconnecting with Mrs. Wilson. "I was wrong about you, Mr. Sawyer," the elderly woman confessed one evening as they sat together in her elegant parlor. "I thought Willow was making a mistake, rushing into marriage with a man she barely knew after such trauma, but you've given her a beautiful life." "She gave me one in return," Luke replied simply. "We saved each other, I think." When they returned to Wyoming, the familiar sight of the mountains rising against the sky filled them both with a sense of homecoming that no city, however grand, could provide. "I love visiting other places," Willow said as the ranch came into view, "but this will always be home." Luke reached across the seat of the wagon to take her hand. "Because we built it together." As they grew older, Luke and Willow watched with pride as their children came into their own. Thomas inherited his father's head for business and his mother's compassionate heart, a combination that served him well as he gradually took over more responsibility for the ranch. Sarah Eleanor, spirited and independent, developed a talent for horses that led to her establishing a breeding program for some of the finest stock in the region. There were losses along the way, of course. Mrs. Carson passed peacefully in her sleep after more than 20 years of service to the family. Frank Miller, the loyal foreman, retired to a small cabin on the ranch property, where he lived out his days telling increasingly elaborate stories about the early years to anyone who would listen. And there were the inevitable marital disagreements, passionate debates about ranch management, parenting decisions, and the changing world around them. But through it all, Luke and Willow maintained the deep respect and abiding love that had brought them together against all odds. On the 30th anniversary of the day Luke had found Willow in that broken-down cabin, they rode together to the North Ridge where he had proposed. Both now in their 60s, they moved more slowly, but still sat close together on the same flat rock, gazing out at the valley below. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" Willow asked, her head resting on Luke's shoulder. Her hair had silvered beautifully, and fine lines framed her still bright blue eyes. Luke considered the question. "Sometimes. If Sarah hadn't died, if those raiders hadn't attacked your family, so many things that seemed like pure tragedy at the time. Yet here we are," Willow mused. "I wouldn't wish those sufferings on anyone, but I can't regret the path that led us to each other." "Nor can I," Luke agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know, when I found you that day, I thought I was simply doing my Christian duty helping someone in need. I had no idea you would end up saving me as much as I saved you." Willow smiled up at him, the love of decades shining in her eyes. "That's the beauty of it, isn't it? We never know when healing will find us or what form it will take." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Luke and Willow Sawyer sat in comfortable silence, their hands clasped together, two once broken souls who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. And in the quiet beauty of that moment, with the woman he had never expected to love resting against his heart, Luke silently thanked the harsh cowboy he had once been, the man who had sworn never to love again, for having the courage to break that vow when he found her.